Well, welcome, Yannick. Thank you so much for coming today.
This is so funny. You know how I used to post a note to hide myself? It just
Yeah.
fell off, obviously, at the exact
It
same time.
wants you to see yourself. It wants you to bask in the glory of Yannick.
Yeah, it wants me to bask in my own glory. That's odd. Yeah, but I think it's very unnatural to see ourselves so often, and I think the whole Zoom like pandemic Zoom generation, it's just like it's so like it's not normal to start a conversation and see yourself right next to the other person. It's like we don't have a mirror next to our friend or our colleague when we talk to them. It's just like, and it takes so much mental energy, I think, because it's very difficult to not somewhat focus on yourself or like have that in your awareness. So I thought a post-it note was a great solution to still record and not hide myself view.
For the
But
couple
here
of
we are.
seconds until it fell off.
Yeah,
The
literally.
genius was there.
Yeah, synchronicity. Was that what? Was it a coincidence? Oh well.
We will never know.
But I was interrupting you, just trying to introduce this.
Yes, I was simply just saying thank you so much for joining today for the existential video series. It's a very simple idea. The word existential is thrown about all over the place, but when I am saying I'm studying existential psychology, the main response is, what on earth is that? So this series is a way of speaking with people who are immersed in the existential world that might give a more accessible understanding of what existential ideas are. And this is exactly why I have called upon your wisdom today. Existential coach, existential philosopher, DJ, man of many talents. How would you introduce yourself?
Oof. Well, first of all, thank you for this the concept of it, because I'm very much aligned. I think that's why we connected initially so well, even though we didn't really know that about each other then. But making the existential philosophy more tangible, more understandable, because it everybody I've talked to, and that's pretty much without exception, um, can relate to the existential philosophy, can relate to the experience of being in the world with other people and hence feeling some existential anxiety. This dilemma and conflict and paradox, like this stuff that we carry with us just because we are human being. Everybody can relate to that because everybody's human. Like some people maybe have pushed that down or suppressed it, put it into a corner, maybe don't want to look at it because it's uncomfortable. It's kind of eerie. It's like it's not a necessarily a nice feeling when when we're confronted with our own mortality, or that things end, or our existential isolation. All of these philosophical concepts, they're very real because they're lived experience. And I always found it like sad that so much of it is hidden in the complex, convoluted philosophical books. And some of them are very tangible in terms of the original plays of Sartre, for example, or some of the novels of Dostoevsky or Camus. um, the Cure wrote a song about Camus, The Stranger. So it is kind of there, but I feel in these modern times, we don't have that connection to the philosophy anymore. I think the connection is there, but it's not really outspoken. Every good story is connected to these existential themes, and we talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure. But like, it's not it's not called existential anymore, and I see it everywhere, and I'm like, why don't we just call it for what it is? This is existential. This is what the philosophers have been talking about. So I appreciate that there's a bit of a renaissance about existential thought and kind of bringing it back into awareness. It's like we've been thinking about this for a long time. So that's why I appreciate that. Part of my mission as well, with my work in coaching, is that we bring that philosophy out so people can get the link between why it's relevant to what they're experiencing in their everyday life.
Mhm.
So I do that now mainly in coaching or under the umbrella of coaching, which is generally having conversations with people that try to navigate some of these big questions in life and many of the smaller questions in life that are underlying those big questions, or the other way around. So coaching is kind of my main thing. So I would call myself an existential coach. Sometimes I call myself a positive existential coach because I came into it through the science of positive psychology. So the empirical research around what makes for well-being and happiness and flourishing. What is optimal human functioning, or what's right with people. Um, so that's kind of how I came in with. I was really interested in science, but also in philosophy. I was really interested in having conversations with people and do something for a living that's not going to get boring. So people is pretty was an obvious choice for me there. They never get boring. And
People never get boring.
yeah, you think you figured them out and then they change, or it's just
Yeah.
everybody's so complex.
Yes,
So
maybe it's that. Yeah.
Mm. So yeah, so I'm a coach. I have a scientist in me, even though I moved out of academia somewhat now. There is a writer in me, but I only occasionally allowed to emerge. I mainly have conversations these days, and I teach. So I work with a lot of coaches. I train coaches. I've been training coaches for a long time. I've run a master's program in coaching psychology, and currently creating a very exciting new coaching online certificate. Many of the greatest coaches in the world. So I'm very passionate about working with coaches because the generative effect of coaching is enormous. You work with one coach and they'll work with hundreds of people, and those hundreds of people will affect other people's lives. We're all living in these systems. So when you work with people who affect other people with their work, it's just very meaningful to me. And I have a knack for like teaching and challenging in a respectful and growth oriented way. And you smile because you've
Yeah,
experienced that.
I know, because they're pretty important values there in a respectful way.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it can be difficult to challenge people in a way that they can actually receive it, and not get defensive. So I there's a real art to having those kind of conversations, and I just love it. There's so much to learn, and that will never get boring. Everybody requires a bit of a different approach to how they best learn. And that's fascinating to me. So I've dabbled in a lot of things. I call myself a multi-potentialite after a brilliant TED talk by Emily Wapnick that I've watched, and I realized, oh, it's okay to be interested in a bunch of different things and like not be a master at this one thing. And allowed me to integrate a lot of different things, and that happened in all areas of my life, from like trying all sorts of different sports to digging my nose into all different sorts of psychology, towards like working with a large variety of different clients. Um, so that's part of my kind of fabric. So I've done some mediation. I've worked in for conflict resolution. I've worked in schools. We created a school curriculum for happiness, well-being, social, personal education. Then I've done a lot in the coaching space. And now I kind of found my home in the personal and professional development umbrella, and that's where I quite like to be. Where it's going, who knows?
I was
For
going to say,
now,
for
I'm very
now.
busy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although I don't like the word busy. I have let's say I have a full schedule. I don't feel busy. I keep talking about I'm riding the wave, not the second COVID wave, which is happening at the moment, for those who listen to this, hopefully in the far future, and we're not extinct yet. But in terms of being involved in a really big project, and like I'm in my element and it's really fun, and I have the skills to kind of ride it, but I also know there's a big wave. It's a big project, and if I'm not careful, it might swallow me. So I do things like create a tracker and see, be a bit more organized about my time and see what needs to get done by when. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. It sounds like a very freeing concept when you reconceptualize being distracted by so many different things, and what am I? What is that single person that I am? And kind of embrace this understanding that we don't have to be this one concrete version of ourselves. We can be
Mm-hmm.
this multi, what did you say?
Multi-potentialite.
Potentialite.
Yeah. Yeah. A generalist, somebody with a portfolio career.
Yeah.
There's many words for it. But like, I think that's also where the existential philosophy already comes in, because there is a significant part of who we are that's been shaped by our upbringing and by our genetic makeup. So there are some dispositions, and we are gravely affected by how our parents have raised us or how our primary caregivers treated us. So some of these things cannot be undone. So there is a part of us that is relatively fixed. There's a huge part that is completely free. So I always see some coaches who say you can be anybody who you choose to be, and you can do anything you want with your life. And I think there's a whole generation that have been told as they're grown up, you can be anybody who you like, whatever you choose to be, you can do it, you can do anything you want. And I don't think that's correct. And it gives this false sense of complete freedom. And then people hit certain boundaries and they get very frustrated because it's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be easy. I'm supposed to be able to do this. Um, but I think for a lot of people, they feel very boxed in and they have all of these limiting beliefs. So some people, like, they need to recognize that there's so much more freedom that they tell themselves. Because if we have freedom, this is where we are in the middle of the existential philosophy. If we have so much freedom, it's also scary.
Yes.
Because like YouTube came around, and all of a sudden we had access to everybody who's awesome at something because they just filmed it and put it up. Imagine you're like a kid in the 50s and you get into some weird hobby and you just kind of do it. And there's like one other person that you know of who also does it. And then, but all of a sudden you have access to people who've done it for 20 years or who do it every day for like 15 hours. Like, if you aspire to be the best at something, it's amazing because we can learn so many from so many people. But it's also scary because like everybody's out there and we have access to all the lives that people live in great detail.
Yeah.
So like, how are you going to choose a career when all of the careers seem to be available? And then you need to make a choice. That's super scary to make that choice. And I remember like close to finishing school, like being asked to decide what are you going to do with the rest of your life, basically. Choose that one thing that you're going to do forever professionally. And that's a scary thing. So yeah, I think we live in those kind of times where it's more prevalent that we have so many choices, but we're free to be so many different people, and making a choice in which kind of person we would like to develop ourselves, where we put our energy in. And I think it's really unhelpful, these messages that we should choose one thing and then pursue that and then become masterful because that's how you're supposed to live. Existentialism teaches us that there are no rules, and except for the ones that we make or the ones that we accept from other people. There's like some of the laws of physics definitely apply. These are some of the facticity, some of the givens, but there's so many rules that are a complete perception. And once people understand that they don't necessarily need to follow the other people's rules, whether that's their parents or their societies or their friends or whatever rules they made up for themselves. As soon as you realize that many of these rules are made up, then two things happen, I think. One is like a really elative sense of freedom. It's amazing. It's like, I can do things differently. I don't have to follow the law if I don't want to. I need to like accept the consequences if I chose to do that, but I could. I could literally go out and kill somebody if I wanted to. I mean, it would affect my life in many negative ways, but like I have the freedom to do that. So understanding that sense of freedom is amazing. But at the same time, it's also really scary because now you need to choose. And when you choose and you recognize that you have that free will to choose, then you also bear responsibility. Because if you do something and it doesn't work out, it's on you. But if it does work out, it's also on you. So that's quite an amazing realization. I love that moment when a client sits in front of me and they recognize their own freedom and they go through these motions like, oh, like you can sometimes see it in somebody's face. It's like their eyes start sparkling because they see the possibility. But then shortly after, they're like, oh, but now, like, what if and we don't have any certainty pretty much ever whether something's going to work out in the way that we want to.
Yeah, and I suppose that's where it's hand in hand with responsibility, isn't it? I've got this choice, I've got this freedom, but oh my goodness, now I have to do something about it.
Yeah, and freedom and responsibility, they go together. You cannot separate them. And too many people want to separate them. I want the freedom, but I don't want the responsibility. Responsibility has this air of like, that's something bad. It's something that's on my shoulders. It's something that's on me if it doesn't work out, you know. But we want the freedom, we want to do whatever we want, but we can literally not have one without the other. It just doesn't work.
Have you read the book Dice Man?
I do not. No, I haven't.
It's a really interesting conceptualization. My interpretation of it is almost looking at what would happen if we have freedom but totally put that responsibility away. It's well worth a read.
Huh.
Yeah, Dice Man.
I have a feeling that doesn't end well.
And this is the thing, isn't it? Because even though, like you've said, that responsibility, especially I feel like the way that it's spoken about, the way the word is used in society, in narrative, something about responsibility feels like a weight, it feels scary, it feels too much, but it's so empowering and it's so important as well.
Yeah, and we see that with
Necessary.
kids as well. Like kids want to be completely free, but if they don't have boundaries, everything goes haywire. They actually really need boundaries. They don't like boundaries, but if they don't have them, it's not a good thing, and they're not enjoying it because it's just very confusing. So we naturally create all of these boundaries so that life feels safer. I've just started watching the Queen's Gambit. It's a Netflix show. It just came out, and I love chess. I haven't played like very regularly or actively in a long time, but I used to play a lot of chess, so that kind of drew me in. And there was a beautiful book by Josh Waitzkin, who was a child prodigy chess player, who's absolutely amazing. Very philosophical as well. He wrote a book called The Art of Learning. Um, which is just lovely metaphors between chess, martial arts, and life. But basically, at some point, Beth, this character in the Queen's Gambit, says that the chessboard feels safe because it's 8x8 pieces fields, and there's clear rules, and there's a lot of possibility and a lot of freedom within, but it's contained, and that feels safe. And I think a lot of people create that in their life. They create these little chessboards and they make up the rules, and then people have to stick to the rules. Imagine you would go to a chess tournament and all of a sudden somebody's not playing
There
to
are
your
no
rules.
rules. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just not
Yeah.
rules. Maybe just like one rule is just different. Maybe the knight just moves diagonally, but also forward. Is like acts as a queen and a rook, and then you're like, oh, but you can't do that. It's like, watch me.
Yeah.
It's like the whole like everything would collapse. But like I feel that a lot of people build those kind of rules so that things feel safe, but that many of those rules are just a social contract that it just takes one person to not do that. And I've learned that from at some point I lived in a house share with 7 other people. I learned a lot about politics. We had a really good system for cleaning. We created a really good system that worked, and it was fair, and it offered autonomy, and like you just like did cleaning whenever you wanted and just put what you've done in a list. And we all agreed on a certain minimum that everybody would do, and you could see in the list what had been done and when. So it was great. It just took one person to commit to it but then not do it, or to just like not. Yeah, and then the second person was, well, if that person doesn't do that, why should I? It should be fair. And then the whole system collapsed. So, but like questioning some of those rules is something I really love, and I think the existentialist generally, I mean, that many don't agree on many things other than the existential givens, but like what I think most have in common is that we question dogma, we question the rules. It's not necessarily that we're all rebels, but like just don't take perceived rules for granted. Look at it, and then you can choose to follow it because it's a good rule, or it makes sense, or it's part of the fabric of our society, and without the system might collapse. But like, don't just accept everything that you're being told this is how it works and this is how it's supposed to be, because we need those thinkers. And that's why philosophers, not just the existential ones, were so important, because they question things, and only when we question them can we actively choose to follow, or we can actively choose to do things differently. But every time we question, it disrupts and shakes our safe foundations. It like shakes the chessboard a little bit. It's like, oh, what if we would change one of those rules in chess? The whole, this is but I guess I kind of like that feeling. It is certainly very exciting.
Yeah. I think you give a really good point there about the fact that existential thinkers often don't always agree, but there are certain elements that they agree on. And while we've slightly digressed by giving a bunch of beautiful examples, I wonder how would you very briefly, at its most basic level, explain what existentialism is?
So at the heart, it is a philosophy at first. So a philosophy is a way of examining or finding out, creating knowledge around things that are too abstract to measure. Where science uses observation and measurement to figure stuff out. Philosophy, like, how do you measure the experience of meaning? How do you measure free will? How do you measure what existence is? So, in the face of a lack of measurement tools, philosophy was a set of thinking tools that could help us to create knowledge. And that's why the importance of philosophy has declined over the last 2,000 years, 3,000 years. And science has kind of taken over because our measurement tools became so much more sophisticated. We can now measure people's experience of meaning in an empirical way. That was just unthinkable 2,000 years ago. So people used philosophy. And so first and foremost, it's a philosophy. It's a philosophy that has at the core the question of what is existence, what is human lived experience, what is the human condition, what does it mean to just be, to just be there. First and foremost, Sartre said existence precedes essence. First and foremost, we are just there. And then we are a teacher, or we are a mom, or we are a politician, or we are funny, or we're rich. All of these things are layered on top of this experience of being there, of being in the world, being alive in the world with other people. So if we use philosophy, and existential philosophers have long thought about that, if we use that kind of process to try to get closer to an answer of that question, then the philosophers have arrived at four kind of existential conditions. The results of being alive and in a world with other people. And they are around freedom and death, or ending, so temporality. Our life at some point in its form right now will cease to be in this form, and whether there's a life after death or not, things end. Everything ends. That meaninglessness, or meaning, that there's this idea of nothingness at the core of existence. There's just we can never know for sure whether our life overarchingly has any sort of meaning. We like to make meaning. We're these meaning making machines. Humans just try to figure stuff out. That's why we made it so far as a species. We try to figure things out and solve problems and make sense of stuff. But ultimately, we can't know whether there's any ultimate meaning of life, or a meaning to our existence. We can make a pretty good guess. We can have faith, but we will just never know. So the argument is that meaninglessness is one of the the givens of being human. We can put meaning on top of that, but like at the core, we can't know. And there's the sense of isolation that every human being is unique. So it's part of the fabric of human existence, is that we're ultimately quite alone in terms of our existential isolation, not in terms of the physical isolation. We can, be, but like nobody is the same as us. Nobody can really truly get what you're experiencing. Nobody, like you can use words or like trying to somehow explain or make art or write a song or like really try to capture your human experience, and we've been doing that for forever. I've been trying to communicate what it's like to be me, but nobody, like, we can resonate. You might resonate with something, but you can never fully appreciate how I'm
Exactly.
experiencing life.
Yeah.
It'll always be different. It's impossible to one transmit it. Irvin Yalom once wrote, I've forgotten which book it was, but he said, we as human beings, we have an experience, and then we try to translate that into a thought, and then we translate the thought into language, and then we communicate that, and the other person has to take the language, put it back into thoughts, and then we translate it back into an image, into this experience. So we can never really fully transmit an image or an experience as it is. We can only ever get sort of close, and that's at the core the existential isolation. Like we're born alone, we die alone. Like nobody can ever be fully understand what it's like to be me.
Mm.
So yeah, in a longer nutshell, I guess that's what existentialism is about. It's a philosophy that's trying to figure out and create some knowledge around what it means to be human in the world with other people.
It feels like the way you've described it, it almost gives people the space to reflect as well, some ideas and some suggestions. And I suppose that's what exactly inspired the concept of existential offerings, that there's this place, there's this uncertainty, there's this solitude of living, and there have been these philosophers who offer insights as to how that might be, or why that might be, or why or who we are as we are. But they are just offerings, and ultimately it's our exploration as we all individually proceed through life to kind of contemplate what's going on, who am I. And like you were sharing at the beginning, do I have to be that one person for the rest of my life? How many different versions of me am I willing to embrace?
And how many different versions of you are you letting go with every choice that you make? And at a very mundane level, I will never be the person that chose to order takeaway today at lunchtime. I can never be that person again. And at a larger level, it's like, what if I had married a different person? What if I had decided to study something else in a different country? Who would have I become? What if I had broken up with this person 6 years earlier than I did? What if I had told that person that I love them, like, and not never tell them? Who might I have become if I made those choices? And we never know. We just never know. So what if I did this? What if I hadn't done that? How, like, there's something just happened to you, and that might have changed the next question you ask me. Maybe that one insight would have never been created in our conversation because I did do it rather than didn't. And then maybe you would have never had that one idea that you would base the next 20 years of your career on. Who knows?
Yeah. And
No.
I suppose the suffering can often come when we get stuck in those what ifs, when we ruminate on those what ifs and go, oh my goodness, and wish for something that's not. And I suppose that's a pretty existential theme in itself, that sense of not facing the reality of exactly what is, which is, many philosophers argue, the hardest task that any human ever has to face.
Yeah, the accepting of not knowing what would have been. It can be really nice to kind of wonder for a little bit. You know, I, I wonder what kind of look at the person I am now. Imagine I would have made a different choice 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I remember vividly reading Milan Kundera, the Unbearable Lightness of Being, and he talks about I think the 7 coincidences that were necessary for him and his love to meet. And what if that hadn't happened? Just one of those coincidences, this one person, like if I had been accepted to a different university and I would have gone there, like my life would be completely different right now. I mean, my wife is Mexican. I mean, how many things have to come together for her and I to meet in a forest in Norfolk, in the UK? That's like, so these are the things that I can think of, like at marvel at, but it can be also really difficult, like especially when things have not gone well and you're feeling a bit fragile right now and you're regretting some of your life choices. Um, but I think this is maybe the positive psychologist in me. I always see the possibility. It's not necessarily a positive psychology thing. Maybe I'm just like so inclined, but it certainly it was useful to spend so much time around this science. It's like in coaching we look at possibility, and if all of these things have, like, if some of those smaller choices have led to amazing changes, what choices can you make going forward? And I think this is what the philosophy offers to me is we have a choice, and so many of my clients, like they told me like years later that, that insight that I have a choice, that I might not be able to affect everything, that a lot of things are outside of my control, but I can certainly choose what I do and what I don't do. It might not guarantee me the outcome, so I can't control the outcome, but I do have choices. It is like what I do and how I position myself towards certain things. Even as Viktor Frankl who was in concentration camps, particularly in Auschwitz, and he writes in Man's Search for Meaning how even when your whole life seems to be largely controlled by outside forces, you can still choose how you relate to yourself and to other people and to the environment, to the situation that you're into, the circumstances. Meaning is always possible. You can always choose to attach meaning to something. Um, a friend of mine, Paulina Stuhlin, she just released a new comic that she was working on for 5 years, and there's this beautiful scene in it where she finds an armchair on the street that looks really comfy, and she's like, "Oh, that would go really well in like the corner of my room." And she lives on the, I think, 4th floor of this building. So then there's like 2 pages where she just like tries to get this armchair into the top of the building, and then puts it in place, looks at it, and realizes it doesn't fit at all. It just doesn't work. She's like, shit, if I don't bring it down now, I'll never, it's going to be here for ages. So she brings it all down again. She comes back super sweaty and she's like, oh, well, that was super useless. But then she made a link to how that was kind of a metaphor to what she had experienced before. And all of a sudden, because the act of attaching meaning to things, she's like, lesson learned. Maybe it wasn't for nothing, And I just love that ability of people to attach meaning to what we're experiencing. You have something that's really shit and really difficult, really suffering experience. But if you create a song from it, or you write it down and somebody else resonates with it and feels some sort of catharsis because somebody else is experiencing a similar thing and now they're not so alone. All of a sudden, all the suffering was worth it. But if we never know that somebody resonated with our song because we never know that anybody's heard it, or that anybody was affected by it because they're not being vocal about it. Maybe that person walks around and dies with not knowing how meaningful that experience was. But maybe that person has faith that because they put the song out there, maybe somebody's heard it, maybe not. Maybe somebody resonated, maybe not. But you can choose to believe that somebody did, which then creates meaning in your life. So it's funny how for such a long time I kind of rejected all kind of faith because it always had this religious connotations, and then realized that all of our life is faith, just because we don't have any certainty. And whenever there isn't any certainty and we do things anyway, we have a certain amount of faith. I think that's where Kierkegaard's leap of faith comes from. He talks about taking a leap of faith, not as a religious faith, even though he was quite religious, but as a bridging of uncertainty. And that is just so important.
So if someone was to be watching this or listening to this right now and having a really tough time, how can existential philosophies support them through that time? How can they be valuable?
So I'm hesitating a little bit because a lot of the existential philosophy, the kind of traditional writers, they can seem quite bleak at first sight. So I think it's like if you would just read Camus' The Stranger out of nowhere, then you would, and you're not the kind of person who kind of thinks deeply about that stuff. It could just be received like you finish halfway through, for example, you're like, fuck this one. You just like, I remember how it opens, and it opens with him like lying in bed with his girlfriend, and the girlfriend is like asking him to get married, and he's like, yeah, whatever. Why not? I mean, I can't see why, like, I don't care. Okay. I mean, I'm paraphrasing massively, but
I guess that
it's not. It's
paraphrasing.
In the wise words of Albert Camus, whatever, man.
Whatever, man.
It could seem quite bleak, and quite like, well, nothing matters. It doesn't really. Why would I care about anything? Nothing means anything anyway, and we're all gonna die. And there's this image of like, sitting in a French cafe wearing all black and philosophizing about how we're all gonna die and nothing means anything. And that's not what existentialism is about, but it can seem like that if you touch it briefly in passing. So I think what it does offer to somebody who's suffering is, for example, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl is one of those books that offers tremendous value to people who are suffering, because I cannot imagine more suffering than that. It's hard to imagine more suffering than being in a Nazi concentration camp. Like, everybody has their own suffering, and I'm sure people suffer to similar degrees, but it's just hard to imagine any circumstances that would objectively mean you're suffering more, so, and that has tremendous value, because it is written in quite a positive way in that sense, and it's much more clear than a lot of the other traditional existential books. So I think Kafka was another one of those. When I read The Trial, my dad's a lawyer, so at some point he said, I was complaining about something. I was like really wound up because there was like an unfairness, and there was like some legal situation, and I'm like, man, I have a bit of a rant, and he's like, you should read The Trial. So I read The Trial, and it was one of those books. At the time I was too young. I didn't quite get it. And I didn't finish it because it was just the whole time I had this experience that this is absurd. It's like none of this makes any sense. And this guy has no clue what's going on. This guy gets arrested, and he nobody ever tells him why. And the whole system is super fucked up. And it's just none of it makes any sense. Why am I reading this? This is absurd. And then years later, I realized that's exactly the experience that the author was trying to create. Because that's what often it feels like to be stuck in the legal system and not knowing what the fuck, it's an important experience as a human being. That's why, people can resonate with it. And, but it's a good metaphor, because at the time it didn't do anything for me other than like make me even more uncomfortable. and only with a bit of reflection and some conversation around it, the real value really transpired. Sartre does a lot with his plays as well. Nausea has pages and pages about like nothingness, and just like this experience of like being in life and nothing really just matters. Like, what am I doing this for? And then realizing through some of my clients who told me how it's like to be stuck in a career that doesn't mean anything to you for 20 years and you're just doing nothing really. um, so these are very important works, but I think it takes a certain kind of engagement with it,
Yeah.
you know. And now there's more modern forms of that are certainly a bit more engaging, and sometimes there's a bit of reflection on it. I love Rick and Morty, for example. Rick Morty is for those of you who don't know, look it up. You're gonna have some fun. It's a cartoon with a scientist granddad who is super smart and developed a portal gun, and so he can go into parallel universes. Any possible world that could exist does exist, and so he realizes that nothing really means anything because every possibility of him exists. Whatever you choose, the person who chose the other thing also exists in this other parallel universe. And it brings up so many philosophical questions around what gives meaning to life and why we should care and what we do with our time. um, but it's like, it's not subtle, it's in your face.
Yeah.
You cannot, like, whereas in South Park, for example, you can to be very kind of modern about where philosophy is applied. South Park is genius. You can watch it and it's just shitty toilet humor, and like it's offensive stuff and kids, and it's badly drawn, but actually every South Park episode has such deep meaning behind it when you look a little bit more closely. But it can be quite subtle. Whereas Rick and Morty is in your face. you know um, Things like Black Mirror, for example, as well. There was a show called The Outer Limits at some point when I was younger, and in The Outer Limits, the bad guys always won. The good guys always lost the whole first season, and then at some point, the good guys won. They got out. It was this episode they were in this cooling house, in this warehouse, and I don't know, it doesn't really matter, but all of a sudden they got out and it was over. And you had built this rule that, this is the outer limit, so the good guys lose. And it always ends in some catastrophe. They're fighting the whole episode about like preventing getting the bomb to the alien planet and blowing them up, and then they finally make it, but realize they just dropped it on Earth. Things like that. Like every time the good guys lost, and all of a sudden, like the rule was broken. So now you didn't know anymore. So I really like when art and movies and stories do that, and when the creators of such bring those ideas and put it in a format that people will find engaging and entertaining. Because you have to kind of, like, people will not that many people will go and read Dostoevsky. I'm glad that still many do, but so many just don't. Um, uh, like going to reading Freud in its original, it's a really difficult read. And this takes a special character to read Being in Time by Heidegger, because while I really appreciate it now for the doors it opened into my own language, first I thought he just makes shit up. So we have to kind of re-engage with the word that he created out of thin air to just kind of figure out what he means and not make assumptions about the word, which I thought was clever already. But no, actually, you go deep into the roots of the German language to look at where that word comes from and what is associated with it. It's quite something. But it's not a joy to read. You have to really work the text, and it's just not something that many people will engage with. But if you create a blockbuster Netflix show with amazing visual stimulation and some attractive people in it, and like a storyline that is captivating, then people will engage with it. And if you then throw some of those ideas out and you create a scenario where people are humans with human challenges, if you go away from the kind of superhero action movie or rom-com, Even they got a bit more complex. But like, if you have something that is every good story, I noticed, has those existential themes in it.
Yeah.
Somebody's struggling to make sense of something. um, Somebody's facing life or death, or a significant ending. Somebody having to make a choice in the face of uncertainty and not knowing. The stakes are high. Somebody's trying to belong, figuring out who they are as a person and who their people are, or which country or group they belong to, where they feel home. you know there's like, all of these existential themes are there. They're all there. Every good story has at least one, usually all of them. So that's the stuff we tell stories about. And like, I don't know any good story that you can't look at through an existential lens and say, this is it. This is existentialism. This is like, they're living it. This is the human challenges that we carry around. This is why life is so difficult, but also why it's so worth living. Because that's the stories that are worth telling. The human stories. They're filled with all of these existential themes. We don't usually tell stories that aren't about overcoming challenges and anxiety and paradox and dilemma and not knowing what to do or where to belong or how to make sense of something. They're usually boring stories if they don't have at least some of that. So that's what got me, like, that's the offering, I think, that existentialism offers, is to not avoid these existential sufferings, this anxiety, not to avoid feeling like that. Because if you do, then you're also avoiding life. And we want to get the most out of life. Generally, we want to, like, feel that it's a life worth living. Like, I've spent my time on this planet well, regardless of what comes after our body decays. There might be something then, but like, I just assume for the time being that maybe this is it. Maybe it's just black. Maybe we return to a live stream, or maybe there's some sort of afterlife. But for now, all I know is that this is as real as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
Everything after remains faith.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that I probably better make the best of this time here, and then we'll see. And I think existentialism encourages us to not avoid feeling human, not to avoid the paradox and the anxiety and the challenges, but to embrace them as the kind of stuff that makes life worth living, the kind of stuff that makes life exciting, that gives us the stories we can later tell as, that was an exciting part of my life. Um, so yeah, embracing the human condition in all its beautiful and challenging facets, as I often say. That's what I would like the world to consider and then choose. Because I'm not saying everybody has to make the most out of life and live the full spectrum of the human experience. You can also live life in as comfortable a way as possible, and just, I don't know, sedate yourself, or not take risks, not do a lot of stuff, keep life stable, adhere to strict rules, not really go out there and seek new experiences. Then you'll be safe in what you know. Chances are people get a bit giddy and they kind of want to have more experiences, and we can get a bit depressed when things don't change. But I've learned that I need to respect when people choose not to live a broad spectrum of the human experience. They just want a kind of a leveled experience, a safe, comfortable experience. And everybody has to make a choice how they want to navigate life. Do you want to take all of it in? Do you want to have all the experiences? Take all the risks and also get all the benefits, and sometimes just fall hard and suffer really badly? Are you going to allow yourself to be vulnerable and fall in love? Or are you going to be very protected and guarded and probably not have that kind of experience, but also probably not have that kind of pain that often inevitably follows? That's up to you guys, and the people who engage with that question. I love to work with, because they ask themselves, how do I want to live? What kind of person do I want to be? What do I want out of life? And how much risk am I willing to take?
like these messages are everywhere. These messages are in the stories that we read, the shows that we see, even if they are covered in neon colors in these days, instead of in these huge, ridiculously complex poems. And you're saying here that we can choose to not explore them and reflect on them really deeply and apply them to our life. We can choose to not do that. But interesting that you say, and I notice it too, that there's this idea that that's more comfortable. There's an idea that it's comfortable to not question and to live within our limitations. But my understanding more and more and more is that that's a false sense of comfortability. And that's where so much suffering can come from when we
well,
are, carry on.
at some point it's gonna hit you in the face, and that's an existentialism called that boundary situations, where we come face to face with one of those existential givens. For example, I've had a partner once, and she kind of avoided the concept of death and dying hard. Like she wouldn't walk past a cemetery. It would make her feel really uncomfortable because she was kind of face to face with the idea of death. Because she was terrified of losing her mom, and bless her, she went through a lot, and I have a lot of empathy for her. But it was clear that she avoided to face that her mom could at some point die, and it's an inevitability. It's gonna happen. I mean, if you're lucky, so to speak, she would die first, and then she wouldn't have to witness the death of her mom. I don't wish it to her, but like something tells me she might prefer that. So, but we cannot avoid the concept of endings. Things end, and a relationship ending, or a job ending, getting fired, a meeting ending, a degree, a course, a program ending, a good time, a good evening. How many people don't want to go home when the evening is so good because they don't want it to end, but endings provide meaning to our life, and it's impossible for things just to never end. So endings are one of those givens. It's just a matter of time until it hits you in the face. And if you've been avoiding it for so long, you're going to fall very hard when it hits. It's like it's going to pull the rug underneath your feet, and you're going to be in free fall because you had denied the reality of death as a concept that's real. So you can be very comfortable in your bubble, but at some point, one of those givens is going to come, and it's going to burst your bubble. At some point, you're going to question whether this is meaningful, even though you've told yourself your whole life that this is why it's meaningful. All of a sudden, you come to a position where, oh, maybe it's not. Shit. So you believe in something, and all of a sudden somebody lives the opposite. You're like, oh, fuck. Maybe, and then you start questioning, and those are the moments where, if you haven't questioned that before, that's why I'm a fan. How do you say? Anyway, I'm stuck on the word. When it's on the tip of your tongue. Proprietor. Anyway, it's good to question, I think, because if you do question that early, and if, for example, the goldfish hasn't gone to the farm up north, although I'm mixing up animals. If I've known somebody who said, well, if we were to have kids, then grandma would go on a long holiday. Grandma wouldn't die. And I'm like, that's not going to work. I would want my kids. I'm still not exactly sure what the right age is, but I have a certain feeling that it probably can't be early enough. There's a time, probably much younger than most people will think, where it's useful to just introduce the concept of death as something that is sad, but you don't necessarily have to be scared of it. It's just an inevitable part of life, and it's going to come. It's going to happen to you and to me, and hopefully not too soon, but there's a possibility. You don't want to scare your kids that you're not going to be there, so it's good that they're grounded. So that's why I'm saying I'm not exactly sure what the right age is. Don't have kids yet, so we're still figuring that out. But I think if, as a kid, if you're 7 or 8 and you have an understanding that death is a thing, then later on it's going to be so much easier to accept that it's happening, you know?
And it makes me think, when you say this, about all of these things that through our life experience, through our development, we come across. We naturally come across death. Children naturally come across something, lying on the road, something,
Mm.
something in a show in some way, someone at school that's talking about it, and how the people around us, caregivers, siblings, how they respond to when we are confronted with these givens, and do they deny that, or do they give us that space?
Yeah. Does it freak them out? You know,
Yeah.
I vividly remember my mom always telling me, it's only ketchup. It's only ketchup when there was blood on TV. I mean, at some point, I guess that changed, but like,
And
yeah.
and it's a shocking reality when you realize that these false truths that you've been told, even though they were comfortable at the time, is it more comfortable to live in that false truth for a while and then have a real, like Greening and Lewis Hoffman talk about this shattering, this existential shattering, these beliefs that we had, these values that we had are just crushed.
Yeah.
And then what
And
do we do?
yeah, and it depends what you're used to and what you see, right? Because not too long ago, it was like very common to see it. It hasn't been common for very long. It's quite special that we live in a time where we don't see dead bodies.
Yeah.
We don't see them. They get covered up immediately when something happens, and something happens rarely enough if you live somewhere in the Western world. I've played capoeira for quite a number of years, and my master was from Brazil, and he at some point he came to the training, and he said that that's so weird. They closed the whole park. Like somebody got stabbed, and like the whole park was closed. Like, why would they close the whole park? Because in where he grew up, they would just like somebody would just like cover the body.
Yeah.
Why would you like? Nobody would think about closing the whole park. Why? Because it's just such a common experience that somebody dies, and it's like, so it's we live in quite special times where we don't actually see death so much anymore. Even the meat we eat, it's like nicely packaged, and we don't really see any slaughtering. I remember vividly as about, I must have been around 12 or so, 12 years old, and I went to a trip to Hong Kong with my dad when I was still British. Um, and there was this market, and at the beginning of the market, there was this older lady sitting there, and she had like two baskets, one with like chicks that were alive and had feathers, and the other one not anymore. And she was just like, and like in every second window, there was like dead animals in its like form. And it was like, I wouldn't call it traumatizing, but it was certainly very eye-opening that there's it's a different level of facing the reality of what we're eating. That was really important to me. Didn't make me a vegetarian then, but like, there's so many people who deny the reality, and you know living in that kind of denial, it's kind of comfortable, but it's so easy for the bubble to burst, and
Yeah.
we make so many decisions based on not knowing, not looking at the uncomfortable truth, and facing that kind of truth. you know um, it takes courage. I think we live better for it, but it certainly takes some courage. Sometimes I'd rather not know. I'd rather not know things and just eat the schnitzel and
Yeah.
not see how it's made. I'd live happier with it, but it's not sustainable.
Mhm.
So I'm a fan of looking at the truth and facing it. But I totally understand how a lot of people don't want to face some of those truths.
And it's symbolic about how the different societies, the different contexts that we exist in, there's a symbolic notion of denying the reality. And if we're exposed to that, and if we grow up in it, that becomes our way of view, our way of comfortably existing.
Mhm.
But yet that doesn't take the givens away, it just hides them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's I think we live, um more real, talking about, I mean, I come from a hip hop age,
Yeah,
so
let's keep it real.
keeping it real, adopted a whole nother meaning, but it's not a different meaning. They actually got it, authenticity, keeping it real, but like facing truths about yourself is what authenticity comes from. You can only but we can only ever weave in and out of authenticity. It's impossible to become authentic and then stay like that, as Heidegger talked about. But like being aligned with your values and your beliefs and your worldview and acting in accordance to it, that's authenticity. But first of all, you would need to take a good look at yourself and how you are with other people. And it's one thing to believe in fairness and honesty. It's another thing to never lie and treat everybody fair. And there will definitely be dilemmas where lying would really hurt somebody, and it would be so easy to not say the truth.
Yeah.
And then also, where's the line between not saying the truth and lying? Is not saying the truth lying? So there's all of these very intricate scenarios where you're like, am I still being an honest, good person, even though I haven't told her that this dress just doesn't suit her at all? you know my German friends often come to me. My German friends are the ones who tell me that I've gained a lot of weight. Like after my wedding, I just like I gained a number of kilos. Now I lost a number of kilos, but there was a time when like somebody hadn't seen me for a little while, and they're like, I lost, you gained quite some weight, eh? And nobody in the UK would
Yeah.
dare to confront me with that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it. Sometimes I was a bit annoyed, obviously, because it's like not something we like to be confronted with. And if we see ourselves every day, we don't notice the change so much. But it was very important for me to kind of, it's like, oh, people notice, you know, and to take a good look at yourself and your values and your behaviors. It takes courage to face yourself. Like, how many people feel so uncomfortable listening to their own voice? If you edit this later, you probably have similar experience. I mean, I still have a similar experience when I see myself on camera teaching. I've done it so much now, but like, I'm like, you're confronted with yourself, and that like, oh, how did I pronounce that? Or, oh, I was looking for the word, or, oh, I looked silly there, or, that wasn't particularly clear, or, oh, the sound of my voice is just weird. Oh, I still have quite a strong German accent. I sometimes think to myself, it's like, huh. So looking at yourself is not something that people necessarily enjoy doing. Some people love it. They just love themselves. We all are narcissists to some extent. But facing yourself with yourself, that takes courage, but it's so helpful. And I think that's part of the courage. Just being human takes courage, but being a human with very opened eyes, trying to keep it real, takes a different level of courage.
And keep it authentic didn't really have the same ring.
Yeah. The body language works though.
Yeah. Are there times in life that or a time in life that the existential ideas really helped you through something?
Yeah, loads. I think if I picked one like major event, it would be committing, like around as I was approaching 30. I think there's something around that age that certainly seems to do something as a certain trend, but like I've lived most of my life not committing to a lot of things. Freedom and autonomy are still important values to me, but it certainly got me to a point where I I didn't plan much. I wanted to keep my options open. I didn't really commit to relationships a lot, so I've had a few longer term relationships, but like I noticed it like my love for freedom and autonomy just didn't allow me. Like I didn't want to commit to anything that was kind of longer term and would kind of bind me in and kind of restrict me and the possibilities for my future. And I've lived pretty happily in my 20s. It was an amazing time. I do not regret it. It was awesome. I was quite carefree, because I didn't commit. Um, because things couldn't go wrong if you
Mhm.
don't expect it to go a certain way. You just kind of go through life, and we call it a drifter. I called it dynamic drifting, because I had a certain direction. I knew this personal development, coaching, positive psychology stuff. Like, people will always have problems and need to figure stuff out. And I knew that there was going to be something. I knew I was going to work in that space. So I was not quite drifting all over the place, but I certainly went with all the currents. If there's an opportunity, I just said yes to it. But I never really created opportunities knowingly and consciously. So I didn't really commit. Um and then the philosophy around that time, I had been training as an existential coach in my, like, yeah, late 20s. So leading up to my 30s, I had come out of training, and the philosophy was just all around me. And that encouragement by all of these thinkers, um the the knowledge around what committing means, because I knew if I committed, and we talked about the freedom and the responsibility, like, as soon as I committed to something, I knew it was gonna open up a sea of anxiety, but also make my life so much more meaningful, because it gives me focus and something to work towards, something that I decided have value. And when I met my today wife, my Nellie, when I met her, and I had that certain feeling that this is, oh my God, this is like really, really special. But I also knew that I needed to commit to it in order to make it work. And I needed to commit hard, because I needed to make some changes in my life in order to make it work. And I needed to commit to a certain path. And if I didn't do that, then she wouldn't have the experience or the trust that I'm actually going to be with her, moving forward. So why would she invest time into a relationship when that person isn't committed to making it happen and moving forward? You know, if anybody's ever been with a person who's not committed, it's really difficult to be with if you want to commit, but that other person isn't committing back. It's very difficult for that to work, because the balance is always going to be off. And I'm all for balance. It was very important. So all of a sudden I had to, like, match her commitment if I wanted to make it work. And that that I realized what I'm getting myself into, and I consciously chose it. So it allowed me to not look back at my 20s and think, I was just, like, living into the day. And when the weather was nice, I would just, like, go to the park and, fuck off whatever plans I had for today. Now I have things I need to get done, and I committed to them. But they're meaningful. So I don't have regrets, and I don't think back to my 20s in a way like, oh, I wish I would still live that kind of life. My life is different now and much more meaningful in many ways, but also a lot more less free in many ways. But that's something I chose, and I think that knowledge is so, so important, that I knew it was my choice and I chose it. I didn't just slide into circumstances that all of a sudden created all of this work that I need to deal with. No, I chose to take responsibility, and I chose to commit. And it comes with all of these benefits, but also it comes with all of this anxiety. So knowing that, because of the existential philosophy, allowed me to be okay with that, and to appreciate that, because it was up to me and I chose. And I think that was the big offering, that it's up to me and I made it happen. And now I can feel proud of what I achieve, rather than feeling like life's just kind of happening to me.
And this is such a beautiful story that you share. But what gives me hope is that even though I know you said you've studied it and came into it through positive psychology, and there was that academic route that you've taken, it it seems really poignant and meaningful that you share how these existential ideas, these existential offerings, these messages are coming from everywhere. And so if we choose to have this openness to them, we have this ability to reflect and to process and navigate our life and make choices and embrace situations in different ways than we might otherwise.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's what it opens up. It opens up taking more ownership of our lives, and there's things we cannot choose. We cannot choose what country we're born in and what our mother tongue will be. There's a lot of things that are given, but there's a lot of things that we can choose. And if we recognize that that choice exists, we own the results. And yes, if it doesn't go well, I guess we hopefully adopt a growth mindset and see what we can learn from this and accept that life just doesn't always go right. Sometimes it goes wrong, and sometimes it goes wrong most of the time, seemingly, but that we can attach meaning to it. So we have a lot more ownership and control over how we navigating this life thing than many of us think. And I think that's huge, because it allows people to yeah to own their lives, you know.
Yeah. For someone that would be interested in exploring the existential world rather than just having it as this discombobulating concept, what advice would you give them? What would be a
Hmm.
pathway in? Or
Yeah, I think you need. Hmm. So I mean, like we said, the existential themes are in every good story. So I guess to read, like, depending on where you're at in terms of your level of enjoyment when it comes to reading and what kind of style you like, you'll find somebody introducing existentialism or existential ideas in a way that can resonate with you. um, I mean, just this conversation is probably a very different take on how to make links between philosophical themes, and, for example, Rick and Morty.
yeah.
Um, there is a great YouTube channel like that's called Wisecrack, and they're very philosophical and they make links to all the popular culture stuff. Quite young guys. Um, there's a Gary Cox wrote a book around called How to Be an Existentialist, which is kind of kind of themed around like a self-help book, but it's still reasonably complex in how he puts things. But it's like one step further. I have quite a bunch of stuff on my YouTube channel or in podcasts, just making those links. Um, I tried to write quite a tangible introduction to existentialism as part of my introduction to existential coaching book. Um, then there's obviously a lot of the traditional writers, Sartre's plays, things like Waiting for Godot, for example, Samuel Beckett. And then there's very quite academic books. The Denial of Death is a great book. Um, I have a whole reading list as part of the introduction I wrote, and I also started a little project where people can add any sort of art or culture, any books or comics, graphic novels, YouTube lectures, TV shows um, that are linked to some existential themes. So if you go to existential.coach/this is existential, you'll find a whole list, and you can add to it. There's an open document on Google Docs that anybody can add to. So I would invite anybody who's listening to this to add their own existential art or stories. Um, there's an existentialism for dummies. That's a good way in as well, and that also has a section on books and movies, and why they are existential. So I think just the story itself, if you want to get into existentialism, is probably useful to look at the book and then just maybe do an internet search on the movie and existentialism. And probably some guy on Reddit wrote an analysis of why this is super existential. So I think people are really interested in setting foot in that space. There's a few introductory textbooks. There's a few introductory textbooks that are a bit more tangible. There's some self-help stuff. There's something in coaching. And then there's the world of the internet, which just like is an endless pit of existential analysis.
Which we're contributing to in our little way as well.
Yeah. I like the wisecrack analyses of Rick and Morty. They mention a lot of the existential philosophers.
It really just is everywhere, isn't it? And you said something about reading the trial, and I wasn't ready for that. And it's so true. I think that we can come across these existential messages in life, these existential these themes, these theories, and just not be ready for it. We've all picked up a book and gone, ugh, and then a couple of years later, 10 years later, 15 years later, been mind blown by it.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine it like an album. There's a few albums I listened to and they didn't do anything for me at the time. And then you listen to it like 3 years later and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah. I feel like it's so important with this world of thought to not force it when it's not feeling right. Connecting with that embodied sense of, oh my gosh, that was so fascinating. I've just listened to Yannick and I'm just mind blown, and I just want to follow that particular thing he said. Because everyone that ever watches this will take something different that's meaningful for them in their own way.
Yeah, and somebody who read Camus' The Stranger and was like super in touch with the existential philosophy in it, they might listen to this podcast like, what are they? They're talking about South Park? I can't deal.
Yeah.
Although that's probably not something they would say, but
yeah.
Yeah, I
Nick,
mean,
thank you.
So yeah, there is a way into the philosophy that resonates, but it might just not be your philosophy. You know, there's other philosophy. I don't claim that this is resonating with everybody. You know, some people it won't. You know, and that's okay. You know, everybody needs to make up their own mind about how the world works, and that's the reason why there's different schools of thought. So each to their own. But I find it difficult to have a human experience and understand what existential philosophy is about and not link the two. I find it difficult to imagine, even though I know many people are able to do it.
Well, and the fact that we're always changing too. So what was a really meaningful philosophy for us last week might not be so important to us today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this amazing chat, Yannick. So
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. I'm totally aware of the fact that this is our very comfortable wormhole that we could dig down in for many hours of good conversation, but I think we must come to an end at some point, like very well said.
We'll meet same time, same place in 10 years. We have another conversation.
Okay, deal. That's a deal.
I'm actually going to put that in my calendar now.
I'm up for it.
Cool.
We'll hopefully see you before then as well, though. Thank you so much.
I'm pretty sure we operate in some of the same spaces. It would be weird.
Thank you so much, Yannick. I'll wish you a good evening now.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You take care.
And thanks for listening, everybody.